Even now, I can recall the moment my life split in two. The day my mother-in-law told me I was unworthy of her son, right before she slammed the door in my face. I was standing in their living room, wearing the same floral sundress I had worn for better days, trying not to let the trembling in my hands show. My mother-in-law, Dolores, had decided that my infertility was more than a medical hurdle. It was a personal failure that proved I would never be good enough. My husband, Aaron, stood behind her, shifting uncomfortably, as though he wanted to peel himself from the scenario but couldn't. In that instance, I realized the entire family had turned against me. They thought I was the obstacle keeping them from happiness because I couldn't provide a child. The hostility felt like a storm, darkening every bright spot of hope in my heart. I still remember how Aaron's eyes flickered with guilt, but not nearly enough remorse to challenge his mother's vicious words. They were condemning me for something I had no control over. We had tried fertility treatments for over a year, but every negative test cut deeper. The doctor said there might be a chance if we explored more advanced interventions, but the expenses and emotional toll were enormous. Aaron had told me he loved me regardless, swearing it was us against the world. Yet in his parents' house, that vow vanished like a puff of smoke. I felt raw, like a wound throbbing in open air, while he stood by, letting them tear me apart. A part of me wanted to scream at him, to break through whatever hold his parents had on him, but the futility of it weighed me down more than any heartbreak I had known before. Days later, Aaron declared we needed time apart. He said he was utterly confused, that the stress of our fertility struggles had poisoned our relationship. In truth, I could see his parents' influence plastered all over his decision. Dolores had hammered home the idea that because I couldn't give him an heir, I was somehow defective. My father-in-law, Frank, had made it clear that a man should have children to carry on the family name. So, under the weight of their disapproval, Aaron packed a suitcase and moved back into their place, leaving me in our apartment with boxes of fertility medications and empty dreams. I begged him not to do it, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. He looked at me like I was a burden he was finally free of, and I felt something inside me break, the last piece of faith I had in us forever. Those first few months alone were a blur of tears, isolation, and a gnawing pain in my chest. I tried to continue life as usual, went to work, did my grocery shopping, paid the bills, but everything felt drained of color. Friends I'd confided in were sympathetic but hesitant to get too involved. Some were worried about choosing sides, especially those who knew Aaron's family. His parents were influential in our community, known for their charity work and polished smiles. I suspect they whispered half-truths about me, painting me as the bitter wife who couldn't accept her fate. My own parents lived in another state and offered emotional support, but my shame ran deep, and I brushed off their invitations to come stay with them. Instead, I locked myself in the home that Aaron and I had once shared, trying to figure out how to exist without the future I'd so envisioned. I allowed myself to wallow for a while, maybe longer than I should have, but there came a point when a spark of indignation flared within me. They had judged me, discarded me like rubbish. Aaron and his parents believed I was worthless because my body couldn't conceive on their schedule. Yet, everything about how they handled the situation felt cruel and inhuman, as though my worth was tied strictly to producing a child. That realization birthed a fierce determination in me. I might have been broken in ways they could never comprehend, but I wasn't finished. The resentment I felt fueled my desire to reclaim my life. I started going online, researching advanced fertility treatments I could pursue on my own, or even exploring adoption possibilities. My motivations were complicated. Part of me still dreamed of motherhood, and another part wanted to prove them all devastatingly and irreversibly wrong. I poured my energies into work too, volunteering for extra projects to keep my mind from drifting into sadness. My boss noticed my newfound determination and offered me a promotion that involved more travel and responsibility. It felt good to be recognized for something outside the realm of motherhood, to feel validated in a world that often reduces a woman's worth to her ability to reproduce. The extra income also opened doors I couldn't access before. I began consulting specialists who were at the cutting edge of fertility research. That path was uncertain, but the idea that I might still become a mother on my own terms gave me hope. At the same time, I started discreetly meeting with an adoption counselor, exploring that possibility. I decided not to tell Aaron or his family about any of this. They had severed ties, and I owed them no explanations, none whatsoever. Months turned into a year, and I found myself stronger than ever. The heartbreak was still there, like an old scar that flared up in certain memories, but I learned to live around it. Every so often, I'd bump into someone who would mention Aaron's name. He was supposedly dating someone new, a woman with a background that his parents approved of. She came from a wealthy family, had a flawless appearance, and, most importantly, her fertility wasn't in question. The rumors stung, but they also reinforced my desire to move forward without glancing back. If Aaron was so easily swayed, then perhaps his love had never been the unbreakable bond I'd imagined. Whenever doubts crept in, I reminded myself that I deserved loyalty and respect, qualities he had failed to show. My sense of indignation overshadowed any lingering loneliness, fueling my drive to forge a different kind of future. I continued my research on adoption, consulting attorneys and social workers who specialized in placing children with single parents. The process was painstaking, requiring background checks, financial statements, home inspections, and personal references. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a true sense of purpose. I pictured myself nurturing a child, guiding them through life's challenges, providing a home brimming with warmth and acceptance. This vision gave me the resilience to tackle every hurdle. During one of my final interviews, the adoption counselor told me about a baby girl who had been surrendered at birth. The timing was right, and my documents were nearly complete. The counselor thought I would be an excellent candidate, given my stable job and supportive environment. A current of anticipation pulsed through my veins. I couldn't believe that after so much pain, the possibility of motherhood was finally within reach. In parallel, I was also undergoing advanced fertility treatments. I left no stone unturned, traveling to different clinics and subjecting myself to endless tests. Nothing was guaranteed, but I clung to the slim chance that I could conceive. I told myself I would adopt whether or not I became pregnant. My heart had room for more than one possibility, even if my body might not cooperate. Still, I remember those injections, the bruises on my skin, and the nights I'd cry into my pillow from the hormonal roller coaster. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and barely recognize the determined woman staring back. Yet, I pressed on, refusing to let my past define me. The doctors marveled at my tenacity, reminding me that if stress became too much, I should take a break. But I couldn't. I felt like I had a finite window of time. Then, everything changed on a late spring morning. I had flown out of state for a consultation with a renowned specialist. After an exhaustive round of examinations, she told me that with a new procedure, my odds of conceiving had risen slightly. It was still a risk, but a glimmer of hope nonetheless. Just as I was processing this news, I received a call from the adoption agency. The baby girl was ready for placement if I could finalize the paperwork. My chest tightened as a wave of emotions washed over me. Gratitude, excitement, fear. Would I be a good mother? Could I handle it alone? After all, I had no partner to rely on, no in-laws to help with childcare. But then I thought about the family that had cast me aside. I remembered Dolores' scathing words, Aaron's cowardice, and how they had left me for dead emotionally. I returned home determined to say yes to every opportunity that brought me closer to motherhood. Within weeks, I had completed the final steps for the adoption. A social worker visited my apartment, poking into every corner, evaluating my suitability. My references spoke on my behalf, emphasizing my nurturing nature and unwavering resolve. It felt surreal when I received the official notice. I had been matched with a baby girl. The day I brought her home, I felt like I was walking on air. She was tiny, with wide, curious eyes that looked at me as though she understood every tear I'd shed. I named her Ava, a name that felt like hope in 4 letters. Cradling her in my arms, I felt a sense of fulfillment that no one could tarnish, not even the people who had belittled me at my lowest point. I settled into a new life that revolved around Ava. Each day, I woke up before dawn to feed her, then rushed to my job, juggling conference calls and client meetings with the demands of new motherhood. It wasn't easy, but I managed. My boss allowed me some flexibility, and I hired a kind older woman, Harriet, to help with childcare when I couldn't be home. My parents also visited from time to time, falling in love with their granddaughter. Their acceptance and joy made me realize how valuable true family support can be. In Ava, I saw endless possibilities, a future that wasn't defined by bitterness or regret, but by growth and love. and every time I looked at her, I remembered how Dolores and Frank had insisted I would never be a mother. The knowledge that I had proven them wrong fueled me like a secret power source. 3 months after Ava came into my life, I received an unexpected phone call. It was my old friend, Lacey, who still kept in touch with Aaron's circle. She told me that Dolores had been diagnosed with a serious illness, something that required a major surgery and a lengthy recovery. Lacey also mentioned that Aaron's new relationship had fizzled, apparently because his girlfriend had discovered he was spineless and still too enmeshed with his parents. I listened in silence as Lacey rattled off these updates. My heart pounded. Once, I might have felt pity or rushed to Aaron's side, but that version of me no longer existed. They had left me behind when I needed them most. Now, if they needed something from me, they would find only a closed door. Still, curiosity gnawed at me. Would they reach out, especially if Dolores' illness made them realize mortality and regret? Sure enough, it was less than a week later when Aaron contacted me directly. I stared at my phone, seeing his name light up the screen. A tumult of emotions churned inside me, but I answered. He started with small talk, asking how I was, saying it had been a while. I stayed calm, giving short, polite answers. Then he told me about his mother's condition and how she had expressed a desire to make amends, to see if I was willing to give them another chance. I nearly laughed at the gall of it. Where was this remorse when they banished me for being infertile? Did they think I was just a placeholder who would always wait around? I told Aaron I was busy and hung up, ignoring the tremor in my voice. The nerve of him, of them, made my blood boil. But I had more pressing matters. Ava. In the weeks that followed, Aaron persisted. He texted, left voicemails, even showed up at my workplace once. He claimed he wanted to see me, to talk properly. My coworkers gave me quizzical looks, wondering who this disheveled man was, practically begging for my time. I refused to engage with him in public, so eventually I agreed to meet at a coffee shop near my office, on my terms. The moment I walked in, I saw the weariness in his eyes. He looked thinner, stressed, his once confident posture replaced by uncertainty. Part of me felt a smug satisfaction. This was the man who had left me for dead. Now he appeared desperate. But I kept my composure. He told me Dolores was recovering but fragile and that the whole ordeal had made them realize the importance of family. He said he missed me, that he had been wrong. I let him talk. When he finally asked if we could try again, if we could move past all the hurt, I felt a grim satisfaction in rejecting him. I told him plainly, I didn't forgive betrayals that deep. I reminded him of the day he walked out, how he left me alone to face his parents' contempt. I mentioned how he never once tried to defend me, how he allowed Dolores to call me worthless. He looked genuinely ashamed, tears gathering in his eyes, but I felt nothing resembling mercy. Then, with a steady voice, I told him that not only was I content without him, but I had a child now, a beautiful daughter named Ava. His eyes widened, confusion and disbelief swirling. I didn't offer an explanation. I watched him struggle to piece it together, the stammers leaving his lips as he asked if she was his. The question was laughable. I told him no, that I had adopted her after he abandoned me. He seemed shocked, as though the concept of me becoming a mother on my own was incomprehensible. I let the silence hang between us, savoring his discomfort. Finally, he asked if he could meet her. My chest tightened, and I felt anger coil in my gut. This man had forfeited the right to any place in my life, yet here he was, wanting to insert himself into my family picture as though nothing had happened. I calmly shook my head and told him it would never happen. A flicker of anger crossed his features, but he didn't press. Perhaps he knew he had no ground to stand on. As he walked out, shoulders slumped, I realized I felt lighter, as though I had reclaimed a piece of myself that had been stolen. My revenge was my refusal. I told them about Ava, watching their faces twist in surprise. Dolores managed a trembling smile, congratulating me. Frank cleared his throat, looking like he wanted to flee. I could see the cogs turning in their heads, imagining how this child might bring them redemption in the eyes of their neighbors or their church community. Maybe they thought if they embraced me and Ava now, people would forget how they'd treated me. Dolores said she'd like to meet her granddaughter. That word, granddaughter, felt like nails on a chalkboard. Ava was not their granddaughter, not in any sense of the word. They had forfeited that chance when they threw me aside. I told them I had no desire to give them the privilege of meeting my child. Dolores's eyes brimmed with tears, and Frank muttered something about regrets. But I stood my ground. I owed them nothing. I left them sitting there, a portrait of remorse, and walked into the sunshine with a renewed sense of self. My phone buzzed with a text from Harriet, a photo of Ava giggling. My heart melted, and I realized that in forging this new path, I had found something far more valuable than their acceptance. I had found my own strength, my independence, and a love that didn't hinge on anyone's approval. 3 years after being abandoned, I wasn't just a woman scorned. I was a mother, a provider, and a survivor who refused to let betrayal define her. Now, whenever I pass by the old spots Aaron and I used to frequent, I feel not sorrow, but a cool indifference. I remember the day they left me because I couldn't have children, and I relished the look on their faces when they saw me with Ava. They had expected my spirit to crumble, but instead, I thrived. In the end, there was no forgiveness, only the sweet taste of a life reclaimed on my own terms. And that, I believe, is the greatest victory of all.